How much money do you need to invest in property so you can just live off the rent? Here's the exciting truth. There are New Zealanders out there who don't have to go to work, but yet they can still go on holiday, they still upgrade their cars, and they can still afford to feed their families. And it's all because they own rental properties that pay them money each week. They just live off the rent. Now, these aren't celebrities who have just made their latest movie. They're not the latest CEO of Fonterra or Spark on massive salaries. They're regular people whose names you might never have heard of. And I wanted to know how I could do that too. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ed, an economist here at Opes Partners. And the truth is I grew up in a pretty humble family in one of the poorer parts of New Zealand. And now through talking about property on TV and the radio and through my podcast, The Property Academy, I get to interview people like Peter Lewis and Kerry Beveridge and many others, people who are legitimately living off the rent from their property portfolios. So how much money do you need to invest in property so you can just live off the rent? The first thing you need to know is that many Kiwi investors don't have to save up a deposit to buy their next investment property. Instead, they use the no cash needed method, which I actually talk about in this video, where they use the wealth they've got in their house to go and buy more houses. And if you do own a house or your own home, you can probably do this too, but just bear in mind, if you do buy a house like this with a very, very large mortgage, 9 times out of 10, the rent won't cover all of the costs. So you as the investor need to cover the difference with cash out of your own pocket, and this is known as the top up. But the lower your mortgage is, the less interest you pay, and the more cash you can take out from your property. So if you want to live off the rent, we need to get the mortgage low compared to the house's value, because your cash flow is directly related to the wealth you have in the property. And stick with me here because this is really, really important if you are going to retire early and just live off the rent from your properties. So if you're like many investors and you start out buying a property with a lot of debt, how do you get that down? Well, there are 3 main ways to do this. You either buy a rental property with a big cash deposit. That's one way, but not many people do this. The second way is you could slowly pay off the mortgage on your investment property, and quite a few people do that. Or the third option is that you buy houses, wait for those houses to go up in value over time along with the rent. And if you do that, you'll eventually build wealth in the property. But how much wealth do you need within your properties to just live off the rent? And that's where I like to use the rule of 4%, which basically says that if you've got $100 invested in a property, you can usually get a 4% cash return. So you could buy a property for $100,000 without a mortgage, if you actually could do that. And after paying all of your costs, your rates, your insurance, your maintenance, you'd get around $4,000 a year in rent as your income. Now, $4,000 a year might not change your life, but once you scale that to a $500,000 property, $1 million property, or even more, you start to earn a really good income. And here's a really easy way to calculate this. Take the amount of money you earn, your current salary before tax, whether it's 60K, 80K, 100K or more, and multiply that by 25. That's the amount of money you'd need to have invested in property to quit your job and still earn the exact same income. So $50,000 a year, let's say that's what you earn at the moment, multiply that by 25. That means you'd need $1.25 million invested in property to quit your job and live off your rental property income. So that might be 2 houses that you own fully paid off. Now let's say you want $100K a year income from the rent on your properties. You'd need $2.5 million invested in property. That might be 3 or 4 houses fully paid off. And if you'd like to see more of these how much do I need to invest videos, do me a quick favor and hit the like button. That's how I know that these are the types of videos you actually want to see more of. And honestly, it just really helps the YouTube algorithm. So if you wouldn't mind, thank you so much. Or subscribing, that helps too. I'm really trying to grow the channel to 20,000 subscribers. And if you do already subscribe, you'll know that if you want to just live off your rent, you can't just buy any property. You need to buy the right sorts of properties. And in my book, Wealth Plan, we split properties into 2 broad groups. We've got growth properties, and then we've got yield properties. Now, a growth property are things like houses and townhouses, which tend to go up in value faster, but they earn less rental income. And then we've got the yield properties that earn the higher rental income, but they don't go up in value quite as fast. And at this point, where you want to live off the rent, which sort of properties are you going to go for? Well, it's going to be the yield properties, because at this stage of your life, we care more about rental income. Now, a classic example of a yield property is a dual key apartment. And here's how that works if you've never heard about them before. Imagine you're standing outside the front door of an apartment, you walk in, and then you've got two more doors once you walk through the front door. Through one door, there's a one-bedroom apartment, and through the other door might be a studio apartment. Now, both are rented out to different people, separate tenancies. And for you, the property investor, it's one property, but there are two sources of rental income. And we call this a multi-income property, and they tend to have those higher rental yields. So let's say you buy a multi-income property like this for $1 million. It might earn $60,000 a year in rent, or around $1,200 a week between the two units. And that means it gets a 6% gross yield. But even if you bought this property without a mortgage, you'd still have costs to pay. Things like your rates, your insurance, body corporate, maintenance. And since you don't want to work, you'll probably pay for a property manager too. That might all come to 20 grand a year. So you've got $1 million worth of wealth invested in the property, and you've got 40K in cash that you're pulling out of it. And that is exactly the rule of 4% in action. And the great thing about this is that rents go up on average by around 4.7% a year, which is faster than inflation most of the time, so that income will likely grow. And a big question people ask is, well, how do I get this sort of money? I don't have $1 million to buy a property without a mortgage, so how am I supposed to do this? Well, there are three main ways. The first is the hardest, which is you invest your money, maybe you build a business and sell it, or you make $1 million in some way, and then you go and buy the property without a mortgage. That's the harder way, and not many people do that. The second way is slightly easier. You buy one of these yield properties, and then you slowly pay off that $1 million mortgage. So you end up with the property with no mortgage on it. You live off the rental income. And some Kiwis do that too. And the last way is to use the buy two, sell one strategy, which is where you might buy two properties, and let's keep things simple. Let's say they're both worth $600,000, and you use the no cash needed method to buy both of them. You put no cash in of your own, you borrow all of the money. Well, once those properties double in value after you've held them for many, many years, you could sell one of them, pay back that mortgage to the bank, then take the extra money that's left over and pay off the mortgage on the other property. Then you're left with a mortgage-free investment property. And since in this scenario you wanted to grow your wealth, you'd probably invest in growth properties at this stage, like houses and townhouses, which go up in value faster. And that's how you can be left with a property paying you money each week or fortnight. You don't need to get out of bed to be paid. You've worked hard to invest and grow the asset, and now you get to live off the rewards. And in my book, I share the story of Tanya. She was a single mum who invested in property slowly over 20 years, and she actually worked with my podcast co-host Andrew to create a plan to do this. She now owns two of these high yield properties, and she earns 80 grand a year from the rent without having to work. She lives her life and now spends a lot of her time with her grandkids. And it's easy to lose yourself in the strategy, the technical details, the arguments about whether house prices will go up or down. And you've got to remember what it's all for. And when I asked Tanya why she did it, why'd she invest in property for? She said it was for her own financial security, the chance to look after her kids and now her grandkids, because she is now financially free all through property. And if you want to do the same thing, you can always head to opespartners.co.nz to book a free meeting. We help regular Kiwis grow their wealth through new build investment properties.